The bed along my south fence has 11 different flowers open in it as I speak, and the first maple leaves are already coming down between the stems. Purple coneflower, asters, goldenrod, a stand of sedum going deep rows. I put that bed in 9 years ago. I have not bought a plant for it since. These are not annuals, not the trays of color they wheel out front every spring, and not the things you dig up and replace when the season turns. My name is Wendell. I have put something close to 400 perennials into this place over the years, and the ones that went in during September are the ones still standing. That window is a few weeks out, which is exactly why I am telling you now instead of the week it opens. 2 or 3 of these you will want to track down before the good ones are gone. 10 plants. All of them go in the ground in September. All of them come back on their own, and I am going to give them to you in a particular order. We start with the ones where September is not a preference, but close to a requirement, and we work toward the ones that simply do better in fall than in spring. Before the list, there is work worth doing in the weeks between now and then, and it is the reason I am not saving this until the window opens. 3 things. Find your plants first. Bare root peony and iris get shipped by mail in fall, and the good-named varieties are ordered ahead and sent out when the season turns. If you wait until you are standing in a garden center with a shovel in the truck, you get whatever is left. Second, look at your ground now, while everything is still in leaf and you can see what is actually there. Walk out in the middle of the day and again at 5 in the afternoon, and notice which parts of the bed are in sun and which are in shade. In spring, the trees are bare, and the same spot lies to you completely. Third, and this is the cheapest source of plants there is, tell the people around you what you're doing. Anybody with an established perennial bed is dividing this fall whether they want to or not, and the pieces they pull out mostly go in the compost heap. A gardener with a full clump of daylilies would rather hand you half of it than throw it away. That conversation is worth more than a catalog. Do those 3 and September becomes a morning with a shovel instead of a project. And there is one more thing about these 10 that I have held back deliberately. They do not only return. Something else happens with them, starting around year 3, and that is the part that ends your spending for good. It is not what most people assume, and I will get to it once you have seen the list. Number 1 is the herbaceous peony. And I want to be specific about the word herbaceous because there are 2 very different plants sold under the name peony. The tree peony is a woody shrub. It costs 3 times as much, and it goes in the ground differently. What I am talking about is the herbaceous kind that dies back to the ground every winter and comes up again in spring. This is the plant where September stops being a suggestion. Here is why fall works, and this applies to all 10, so I will explain it once here properly. In September, the air has cooled off, but the soil has not. Soil holds heat far longer than air does, so you get a stretch of weeks where the ground is still warm enough for roots to grow actively, while the air above is too cool to push new leaf growth. The plant has nowhere to spend its energy except downward. Ashley Best at the University of Georgia Extension puts the mechanism plainly. Cooler air with warm soil lets a newly planted perennial build roots without losing water through hot leaves. That is the whole advantage, and it is why a fall planting comes up stronger the following summer than the identical plant put in that spring. The extension guidance is to finish planting about 4 to 6 weeks ahead of your average first hard frost. Across most of the country, that puts the window from September through the middle of October. Now, the peony detail that matters more than anything else I could tell you about it. Plant the eyes, those pink buds on the root, no more than an inch or two below the soil surface. Deeper than that, and you get a healthy green plant that never flowers. Not for one season, for years. That single mistake is behind most of the peonies in this country that have never bloomed. The plant is fine, it is just buried. Get the depth right and a peony will outlive the person who planted it. There are peonies still flowering on farmsteads where the house burned down decades ago. Number 2 is bearded iris. September is when bearded iris wants to move, and it is the one plant on this list that will tell you plainly when it is unhappy. The clump gets crowded, flowering drops off, and the center of it goes hollow. Bearded iris grows from a rhizome, which is that thick horizontal root that looks a little like a piece of ginger. And the rule with it runs opposite to almost everything else you plant. The rhizome sits on top, not buried. You want the top of it visible, sitting at the soil surface with the roots spread down into the ground beneath it. In hot southern gardens, you can let a thin skim of soil cover it, and no more than that. Bury a bearded iris the way you would bury a bulb, and it rots. That is the whole story of iris failure, and it happens constantly because burying things is what planting feels like it should be. Point the fan of leaves in the direction you want the plant to travel because it moves forward from that rhizome year after year, marching slowly across the bed. Full sun, sharp drainage. It will forgive poor soil and it will not forgive standing water. Number 3 is the daylily. And this is the plant I would hand to somebody who has killed everything else. Daylilies go in during September and take hold before winter with almost no attention from you. They tolerate clay, they tolerate drought once established, they tolerate the strip along a driveway where the snowplow throws salt. Each individual flower opens for a single day. That is where the name comes from. But an established clump throws so many buds that the display runs for weeks. And the reblooming types come back for a second round in late summer. Plant the crown, the point where the roots meet the leaves, right at soil level. An inch too deep is fine. 4 inches too deep and it sulks. Here is what makes the daylily worth its spot on this list. Of all 10, it multiplies fastest. A single fan planted this fall becomes a clump you can pull apart into 4 or 5 in about 3 years, and each of those becomes a clump of its own. I will come back to what that means for your wallet. Number 4 is garden phlox, and here the exact name matters. Garden phlox is Phlox paniculata, the tall one that flowers in mid to late summer. There is another phlox sold in the same aisle, annual phlox, which is a completely different plant that dies at the end of the season. Buy the wrong one, and the video you are watching becomes a lie through no fault of mine. Garden phlox is the plant that gives you that big domed head of pink, white, or lavender in July and August. The scent carries across the yard on a warm evening. It has one real weakness, and I will not pretend otherwise. It gets powdery mildew, that gray dust on the leaves, and it gets it worst when the plants are crowded and the air cannot move. So space them properly. 18 inches to 2 feet apart, and resist the urge to close the gap because it looks sparse the first year. It will not look sparse in year 3. Newer name varieties have real mildew resistance bred into them, and it is worth reading the tag rather than grabbing the cheapest pot. Number 5 is purple coneflower. Echinacea is the one on this list that asks the least of you and gives the most back per square foot. Full sun, average soil, and it flowers from midsummer until frost shuts it down. Plant it in September at the same depth it sat in the pot, water it in, and leave it alone. Now here's the part I want you to actually do, and it goes against every instinct a tidy gardener has. Do not cut it down in the fall. Those brown seed heads that look finished are full of seed, and through the winter, goldfinches will work them over one at a time. On a January morning with snow on the ground, there is nothing else happening in the yard except birds on the coneflower stems. Cut those stems in October, and you have thrown that away for the sake of neatness. Cut them in early spring instead, just before the new growth pushes. The bed looks untidy for 4 months and pays you back in birds. Number 6 is Black-Eyed Susan, and this one comes with a warning that explains a great deal. There are 2 plants sold under that name, and they are not equally reliable. Rudbeckia hirta is the common one. It is what most garden centers stack out front. It is what is in most wildflower seed mixes, and Clemson Extension describes it as a short-lived perennial that should be treated as an annual. It flowers hard, it seeds around a little, and then it is gone. Rudbeckia fugita is the true perennial. The variety you want by name is Goldsturm, and Clemson lists it as perennial in zones 4 through 9. So if you have planted Black-Eyed Susan before and watched it vanish by the 3rd summer, you did not do anything wrong. You bought the annual one. Nobody tells you, because on the shelf they look nearly identical, and both tags say perennial. Read for Fulgita. Ask for Goldsturm by name. If the tag only says Rudbeckia with no species on it, assume it is hirta and buy it knowing what it is. Number 7 is New England aster. This is the plant carrying your garden through the part of the season when everything else has quit. Deep purple, sometimes pink, flowering in September and October when the bees are desperate and there is very little else open. And here is a warning worth more than the plant itself. Those chrysanthemum-looking asters that appear in supermarket parking lots in September, in the black plastic pots, forced into full bloom for the display, most of those will not survive a winter in the ground. They were grown to be decoration, not garden plants. The one you want goes in as a proper perennial from a nursery in September, with time to root before the cold. It will be a modest thing this year, and a 4-foot column of purple in 2. If yours flops over in late summer, cut it back by half around the beginning of July. It flowers a little later and stands up on its own. Number 8 is goldenrod, and I have saved a particular argument for this one. Goldenrod does not cause your hay fever. It has been blamed for generations because it is the thing you can see. Goldenrod is tall, it is bright yellow, and it flowers at exactly the moment everybody starts sneezing. So it took the blame. The actual culprit is ragweed, which flowers in the same weeks and is almost invisible. Dull green, unremarkable. Nobody photographs it. Ragweed pollen is fine and dry and travels for miles on the wind. That is what gets into your sinuses. Goldenrod pollen is heavy and sticky. It is built to be carried by insects, not by air. It physically cannot do what it is accused of. Meanwhile, it is one of the most valuable late-season plants you can put in a yard. It feeds an enormous range of insects at the point in the year when almost nothing else is producing. There is one thing to get right when you buy it, and it decides whether goldenrod is a good neighbor or a problem. Choose a clump-forming garden variety rather than the wild roadside kind. The wild sort travels by underground runners and will work its way through a bed in a few seasons, coming up between the roots of things you would rather keep. Named garden varieties sit where you put them and widen slowly, the way a peony does. Full sun, and it wants poor ground. Feed a goldenrod, and you get a tall, soft plant that falls over in the first hard rain. This is another one where the correct treatment is to do nothing. It also flowers at the exact moment the asters do, in the same weeks, and yellow against deep purple is the reason that pairing shows up in every autumn border worth looking at. Number 9 is helenium, sometimes called sneezeweed, which is another plant libeled by its own common name. It does not make you sneeze either. The dried leaves were once ground into snuff, and the name stuck. What helenium gives you is late color in a register nothing else on this list covers: rust, copper, burnt orange, deep red, with a raised dark center. It flowers from late summer into fall alongside your asters and goldenrod, and the three of them together are what an autumn bed is supposed to look like. It likes more moisture than most of the plants here. If you have a low corner that stays damp after rain, that is where this goes. Same trick as the aster if it gets leggy. Cut it back by about half in early summer, and it comes back shorter and sturdier. Number 10 is sedum, the upright kind, the one usually sold as autumn joy. This is the plant that earns its place twice over. Through summer, it is a neat blue-green mound that asks nothing. In late summer, flatheads form and turn pale pink, then deepen to rose, then to a rusty bronze as the nights get cold, and then it stands there all winter. The stems stay upright and hold the dried heads through snow, so the bed has structure in February instead of being flat, bare dirt. Sedum wants poor soil and full sun, and it wants you to leave it alone. Rich soil and generous watering make it floppy. The whole thing splits open at the center like something sat on it. The fix is not staking. The fix is neglect. If you have a bed you consider too poor for anything decent, that is the ideal spot. So there are the 10. Now let me give you the part that is the same for all of them, because the planting itself takes about 4 minutes per plant, and most people get 2 things wrong. Dig wide, not deep. The hole wants to be roughly twice the width of the root ball and no deeper than the root ball is tall. Roots travel sideways through the top layer of soil, not straight down. And a hole dug deep gives you a plant that settles over the winter and ends up sitting too low. Set it so the crown is level with the ground around it. Then firm the soil with your hands rather than stamping it with your boot. Water it in immediately and water it properly. Not a splash, a slow soak that fills the hole and drains, which settles the soil against the roots and drives out the air pockets. Then keep the ground slightly moist for the first few weeks, and note the word slightly. The extension guidance is explicit that you want moist and not waterlogged, and fall does half of that work for you because a cool plant in cool air is losing far less water than the same plant in August. Then an inch or two of mulch and keep it off the crown. Mulch piled against the stems holds wet right where the plant is most likely to rot. That is the whole operation. Wide hole, level crown, deep soak, thin mulch. Before I explain what happens in year 3, I want to say one thing. If any part of this changed what you were planning to do next month, that is the whole reason this channel exists. Subscribing costs you nothing. Do it now rather than at the end, because what comes next is the part that actually answers the question in the title. Because coming back every year is not enough to stop you buying flowers. A plant that returns is a plant you do not have to replace. It does not fill the bare corner by the shed, or the strip along the drive, or the spot where something died last year. What fills those is division. Every one of these 10, once it has been in the ground about 3 years, can be dug up and pulled apart into separate plants. Each piece is a full plant with its own roots, and each one goes on to become a clump of its own. Daylilies are the extreme case. One fan becomes 4 or 5 in 3 years, and those 4 or 5 become 20 in another 3. I have given away more daylilies than I have ever bought. Bearded iris is close behind, and it actually needs dividing every 3 or 4 years to keep flowering, so you get free plants as a side effect of routine maintenance. Hosta, phlox, aster, helenium, and sedum all divide readily on a 3 to 4 year cycle. Coneflower and black-eyed Susan divide more slowly, closer to 4 or 5 years. Peony is the exception, and I want to be straight about it. A peony resents being moved and can sulk for 2 or 3 years afterward. Divide it once a decade at most, and only if you genuinely want more. Plant it where it is going to stay. The arithmetic is not complicated. 10 plants this September become something like 30 in 3 years and closer to 100 in 6, and none of that costs you $1. You will run out of bed before you run out of plants, which is when you start handing them over the fence. That is the answer to the title. Not that they never die. That they multiply while you are not paying attention. Now, before you go out and buy 10 of everything, there are perennials that do badly in a fall planting, and you should know which. Anything with a fleshy or brittle root that sits wet through winter is a poor bet. Red hot poker, some of the ornamental grasses, lavender, and most of the woody Mediterranean herbs. Those go in during spring, so they have a full season of warm, dry soil to establish in. Put lavender in this September, and there is a fair chance you are looking at a dead gray stick in April. Late flowering plants you buy in full bloom are a gamble too. And this is the aster warning again more broadly. A plant pushing flowers is spending on flowers, not on roots. If you plant something in September that is still blooming hard, shear the flowers off. It feels wrong, and it doubles the odds it survives. And if your ground freezes early, the upper Midwest, northern New England, the high plains, move your whole schedule up. Late August into the first week or 2 of September is your window, not the end of the month. The rule is roots need 4 to 6 weeks in warm soil, and where winter arrives in October, you have to count backward from that. So here is how I would actually use these 10, because a list is not a garden. Think of it in 3 layers of time rather than 10 separate plants. Early summer is peony, iris, and the first daylilies. Big, showy, and finished by July. High summer is phlox, coneflower, and black-eyed Susan carrying the middle of the season, which is the long stretch where most yards run out of anything to look at. And then autumn belongs to aster, goldenrod, helenium, and sedum together. That group is the reason my fence bed still has 11 things open with maple leaves coming down around it. Plant 1 from each layer and you have color from June to frost. Plant all 10 and you have a bed that fills itself in. In the next few weeks, before the groundwork starts, do one thing. Find your peony. It is the slowest of the 10 to establish. It is the one worth buying good, and the named varieties sell out first. Everything else on this list will still be available in October. The peony will not. Then tell me in the comments which of the 10 you are starting with and what state you are gardening in, because September in Vermont and September in Georgia are 2 different months wearing the same name. I would be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. New videos go up every day. See you next time, friends.